topic for the final round of discussion is: certain sectors of agriculture are labor intensive and rely heavily on immigrant workers. What is a fair and balanced immigration policy? Each contestant will make a 30-second opening statement in voluntary order. After the opening statements, there will be 30 minutes of discussion, followed by 1 minute of quiet time to allow the contestants to prepare their closing statements. We will then hear the closing statements in voluntary order. At this time, I would ask each contestant to introduce themselves with their name.
My name is Jamie Finch.
Scott Rhodes.
Tim Lesher.
Josh Randolph.
Thank you. And congratulations on making it to the Final Four. We'll now hear the opening statements in voluntary order.
The future and national security of our nation depends each day on immigration policy and labor. If we don't have an immigration policy and labor, the foods that we eat, the fruits that we eat, the milk that we drink will not make it to our store shelves if we are not working on a true immigration policy. We need to be sure that the food and fiber of tomorrow gets to our stores safely and cost effectively.
The agriculture sector needs to focus on immigration reform. It's very important to us. We currently have 700,000 undocumented workers working in the agriculture sector. I think that we need to come up with a program that accommodates these undocumented workers, something that's flexible for these workers and something that is reliable. And I believe that we should come up with a solution for that.
Farm Bureau needs to help in the creation of a fair immigration policy to help protect millions of dollars worth of products, ag products that are intended for the consumer. This is an issue that is going to be very important to us in the near future.
Immigrant labor is vital to many sectors of agriculture. I believe we need to reform the policy the current policy so that the workers still have jobs and get compensated fairly. However, it needs to benefit the farmer, that they don't get special treatments just for being migrant workers.
You have heard the opening statements. Now we will go on with 30 minutes of discussion.
Jamie, I think you make a great point about 700,000 undocumented workers in this country, but what about the 1 million workers that are documented each year as agricultural workers with an H-2A clearance or a L-2A clearance?
The H-2A clearance does allow the documented workers to come in and allows them to apply, or the farmer actually applies for a worker, and that worker is stuck with them through that year. And it's not very flexible. Once that migrant worker comes in, then they cannot leave that farm. It's also expensive for the farmers. A lot of them have to pay $8 to $10 more an hour for these workers. And it's also a lot of paperwork for the farmer.
That's right. The current policy states that I believe they get compensated $9 an hour, which is higher than minimum wage, and they also have to supply transportation to and from the work site. These are things that the local people from the local community wouldn't get if they had to work. I feel like we need to have a policy that satisfies the need for these workers, but at the same time gives them fair treatment as far as the current U.S. workforce.
I'll agree with you, Josh. There's a lot of amenities that migrant workers are required to have that actually the farmer himself might not have, or even his family. But yeah, we need to be able to encourage a fair enough policy that we can have these individuals come in so that we can, like I said, harvest many acres or millions of dollars worth of product, whether it be in tree fruits, vegetable production, or even cattle in slaughterhouses.
And I think you're right. You're on the right track, Scott. Definitely, we need to have those workers. But what about some of the stipulations that come? I mean, there's a lot of people that are using the illegal immigration. They're using illegal immigrants because of simply, it's going to say, being able to get enough documented H-2A workers. And that, if we're not sure what the problem is a lot of it's the cost. And getting them into this country and getting them documented, you know, and once you have them, you're always worried that INS is going to show up on your door and you know, take your operation down with it.
There's been slaughterhouses that have been shut down for days by INS coming in and having a raid. That, you know, there's millions of dollars worth of cattle standing in the yards, for example, that you know, products that are being held up all because of an unfair policy.
Scott, do you think the current problem with the policy is that we have non-documented workers working in these facilities, and that's what you're saying is shutting these down? Or do you think the current policy is, the problem with the policy is the stipulations that go with having to have these type of workers, that a lot of employers don't want to have to go through all the extra amenities to have them?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest costs is, you know, it's easier for most of these farms to be, or industries to be able to get the illegal ones in, because it doesn't cost them as much, because they don't have to provide all the different amenities to them. And, you know, standing back and looking at it, it gets expensive to be going about it the lawful way. So what we need to do is we need to, as Farm Bureau, we need to help sit down and try to figure out a way that we can create this a policy that's good enough that we don't have to, or we can compete, that you can bring in workers and compete against the illegal workers.
So let's recap and say that if we are having illegal workers, my biggest fear about illegal workers, I'm just as concerned about the economy as the next person. But if we have illegal workers, that money's getting paid cash, ends up going back to other countries, back to their home countries, and never makes it back into our economy and helps pay our national debt down. So if we do have a fair policy that allows them to be here, then that money would be paid and the government would get 30%, just like everyone else. They'll get a tax taken out. So they're actually they more or less earning their keep, because they're contributing to the local and the national economy.
Give migrant workers some pride in being a national citizen, to be able to spend their money freely in our area rather than shipping it elsewhere. Correct.
I think some of the reform has to be in we need to maybe make it easier for the migrant workers to so we don't have illegal. I believe a lot of times they don't know the correct procedure to go through, and then they end up having that they're afraid to tell their employer just for getting deported or other things. And we need to make a policy, and maybe Farm Bureau can help, that will make this easier for them, so that employers can get good workers without all the hoops.
And that's great. And I'll be right to you, Jamie. If each of those employers is going to say is having them, and I feel is going to say, I don't have any migrants, but they're very hard workers. And right now is going to say, with unemployment as high as it is, we've got unemployment 10%. But those people that we have sitting on unemployment would rather sit on unemployment than to work those blue-collar jobs for minimum wage. It's more or less an entitlement thing. And I would rather see that money go to the very hard-working immigrants from other countries than to see it go to people sitting on unemployment.
Part of the undocumented workforce, they're actually documented. They're handing their employers documents that will get them past their I-9 form. That the way it states now, as long as it doesn't appear to be as fake as can be, the farmer has to accept it. And what Congress is trying to pass now is the E-Verify system. And that would allow them to actually check the documents and make sure whenever they say that it's Scott Rhodes, that it's actually Scott Rhodes and it's not, you know, Joe Schmo. But working with that, if you would lose 700,000 of the undocumented workforce, which actually accounts for 40% of our migrant labor force right now.
And I think that's a good point. But are we willing to go to that length and find out what will happen if we have 700,000 undocumented workers leave this country? 700,000 workers, that means cows wouldn't get milked. It means that, you know, in these slaughterhouses, beef or chickens or whatever may not be killed. That means the fruit won't get planted or picked, and the vegetables won't get planted. You know, or can we as farmers and agribusiness people honestly take that chance on our financial security? We've seen what happened in Washington and in Georgia, you know, 2 years ago and 3 years ago. One, they didn't get their apples picked, and the two, they didn't get their peaches picked because of their labor shortage.
Tim, going closer to home, for example, a couple years ago, Keith Eckel put up a stand, our past president, that he took a couple hundred acres of vegetable production, especially tomatoes, out just for the simple fact that he couldn't follow up with getting migrant workers the lawful way and keeping up with things. So he took a stand and had decided to take a couple hundred acres of tomato production out.
I think, Scott, you have a very good point. I mean, I lived in that vicinity, and I know there's very heavy vegetable production, and that vegetable production not only employs a lot of intense labor, but it turns a lot of money back to our local economy. And that was a big blow to our local economy, that farms were transitioning away from vegetables because they couldn't get the laborers. And for me personally, that means that there's a less abundant food supply in my neighborhood of good, fresh, local food. I know you and I discussed before on immigration. What I think is a big problem is the fact that we have so many of diseases coming into this country, and we need to do more safeguards to protect our people and our food safety.
To address the point that you brought up before of are we as ag producers ready to lose this workforce, I think that no, we're not. We cannot stand to take that loss. So I think as Farm Bureau members, we need to create a more fair and balanced policy that lets these undocumented workers maybe stay here on an ag card and let them start to get documented and start to be the legal process without shipping them back and losing it totally.
I mean, talking about the migrant workers, we're in an instance where we're going to eliminate our migrant workers. We're talking about, but at the same instance, it wasn't all long ago we talked about child labor laws. So we're not allowed to have our children helping on the farm and doing some of these tasks that help in production agriculture, or even hiring some of the local kids, and at the same time we can't have migrant workers helping us there. In this country we're trying to teach everybody that don't settle for minimum wage, and that's one of our biggest problems is nobody wants to work for minimum wage, and that was something that Tim brought up earlier. Everybody wants to go on to higher education, but nobody's willing to take that lower job until they get a higher job. So yeah, I mean, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place where at first, we're up in arms about who's going to do all our work.
Go ahead.
I've talked to a few farmers that employ migrant workers, and I've heard them say that they'll show up one time, they won't have other activities that traditionally local kid will want to go here or want to go there. So I agree that we need to keep this workforce available to farmers. What we need to do is find a way to document these, or like you mentioned, like maybe a temporary ag for the season that would allow them to be here without the fear of all this other hassle of being shut down or whatever for being an illegal worker.
A seasonal work permit would be great, because it's not something that has to be 12 months. Where during harvest or planting and things like that, where they can come in and they can help and provide labor, and also encourage them to maybe spend some money locally, and if they want to stay longer, we can make some things available to them.
Scott, I think the problem with that, with the seasonal permit, is what do we do in the dairy industry? It's going to say where we have immigrants milking cows. That's not a 12-month, or that's not a seasonal thing. That's a whole year round. Current policy says they're allowed to stay 11 months out of the year. They have to go home and spend 1 month in their home country. Some new policy that came out of the American Farm Bureau Federation a week or two ago that they're looking at with other industry leaders states that they would be willing to, in people, immigrant labor that was in a management position, would be allowed to stay up to 4 years and 11 months, and would have to spend 1 month at home every 5 years upon approval from their employer.
So it'd be encouraging to take ownership with their position and show some pride.
That's exactly right. They're going to do a better job because they know they're not going to have to be harassed, and that they're going to be paid better because they've been there longer. That you and I are going to give them more responsibility because we can trust them, and we're not worried they're going to leave tomorrow.
Scott and Tim, I agree with both of you. Most workers, if they show that there's longevity or benefits to a job, will work better. A lot of times, with only working, they know they're going to leave in 11 months. I agree that maybe this new policy of maybe management sounds like it would be very ideal to help promote them for longevity. And keeping, that way you can keep a good worker around longer.
Jamie, how do you think that we could encourage some migrant workers to stick around longer and take, like I said, take ownership in their nationality of staying in the United States?
I think we need to create a policy that's flexible. One of the issues with the H-2A program is that when that worker works, they work on that particular farm. They can't go anywhere else. So when the season's over, they have to go back home instead of going to the dairy farm that might need help or going to a different industry that might have a different planting time and harvest time. So I think that we need to work on that. I'm not saying that the H-2A program is terrible. I'm just saying that we need to create some flexibility for both our farmers and take into consideration the needs of our workers.
I think a vital tracking of those workers needs to be in place, though. I think the reason that there was not as much flexibility as you're asking for would have to be because once they disappear off the radar, we don't know where they are. I mean, they could be here today and gone tomorrow, and that's the reason we have so many illegal workers. And my biggest fear is, with all other aspects of vegetable and fruit production anymore, hair nets and beard nets are almost a must. Gloves are required in a lot of industries. My biggest fear next is food safety. It goes back to a story I read not long ago about National Holstein Association president's herd, Doug Maddox's herd in California. His herd turned up positive with tuberculosis. And he was on a national testing program, and once they tested all the employees, he had illegal immigrants, and it turned up that 2 of his employees had given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a calf and caused the complete dispersal of his herd.
I think going back to the tracking part at the beginning of your discussion was that with this E-Verify system, we would be able to track them as they go from farm to farm and where they're at. The problem with it, the way that they want to pass it now, is that it doesn't take into consideration. It doesn't take into consideration.
Are you not? So what you're saying is you're not concerned about the food safety from each person that's going to say, and that we're not getting a safe supply? Because if we're not tracking and following them, making sure immunizations are up to date, now it's going to say we wonder how E. coli and staph infections break out in some of these, like the large chicken farm in Ohio, and we wonder how we get Brussels sprouts and we get kale and those things that come out with Clostridia. And those things, considering that most of them are taken or harvested by migrant labor, do you think that maybe that has some of the effects on why these outbreaks happen?
I mean, I definitely think that you have a great point there, that it does, we don't know if these workers are sick. They're undocumented. They're obviously not insured. They can't go to the doctor to seek treatment. So I think that one of the things we need to look at too is taking into consideration the health of our workers. What do we as Farm Bureau need to come up with to create something for them so that they are able to take care of any health issues that may arise?
I agree with Jamie and Tim that I think a new policy would benefit the farmer to make sure that his food is safe by making sure that these workers have the shots and influenzas that us as citizens have and keep up to date. The other thing I think, as far as your tracking, if we have a tracking system in place that makes them stay at one farm, or maybe that's why we do it, that would help with this whole making sure they're up to date on immunizations.
And Jamie and Josh bring up a good point that maybe we should start reshaping things through our Farm Bureau and our grassroots. We should see what lengths people are willing to go to protect food. Maybe we should come up with some food safety protocols, such as type of gloves and protective clothing that we would expect them to wear, and that as far as how often we wash hands and things like that. And maybe the health and safety of our workers is just as important as having him here fair and legally.
I know food safety is probably one of the biggest issues going on right now in the United States. You know, and one of the biggest things is those individuals that are out there picking our product. I might have spent as much time as I could doing all the right things, but in those last couple seconds that it's put in that box, it can be ruined. And at the same time, not only does that just hurt my name, but that hurts the whole face of agriculture. So there's a whole bigger issue here that we need to look at, helping to foster a better face for agriculture by coming down with the right type of policy and education and health benefits to be able to get migrant workers in, to be able to pick our products and get them to that final shipping point, you know, to the final consumer.
So we've discussed the cost. Now we've discussed the food safety. Do you think that upon implementation of a new immigration policy, that we should have their time here in the country lengthened, you know, from the 1-year standard to a 5-year standard for management positions, or do you think that we should stay where we are?
I think it's real big in the ones that are trying to take ownership, like I said. You know, the ones that are willing to move up, the ones that are showing that they're going to stay there, you know, even a review by a boss, things like that. Good words that can keep an individual around. Some of those individuals want to stay here. And you're going to have the ones that want to work for 3 months and move on to the next job or go back home. But I think one of the biggest things is the ones that are willing to stay are going to be the ones that are going to, you know, float to the top.
Scott, you brought up a good point. That I think the key issue here is to realize how the farmer is using these workers. If they're viewing them as a expendable item, as far as we'll use them for 11 months and then we'll hire someone else, because basically they're going to end up keeping on training more and more people will keep them on the less highly trained skills, which I think is the majority of what this workforce is used.
Yep, good point, Josh. I appreciate that.
What we need to address is the idea of keeping them for a longer term is a great idea. However, do they want to stay longer term, and B, are the people who are employing or using these type of workers, are they looking for that type of work from this workforce?
I think you're right. They're looking for that type of workforce. So how we at this point right now, Immigration and Naturalization handles, INS handles, you know, tracking a lot of these people. Who do we think is responsible? I mean, I think we as farmers and Farm Bureau members should be just as involved in tracking how these workers get out to farms. I think, you know, with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we could set up some kind of tracking device, and that we could keep them at the right places, get them back within their time constraints, and get the right ones in the right management positions, you know, in the right frame of time, so we can avoid some of these shutdowns that we have.
I agree with you, Tim. I worked with people with H-2A visas before from other countries, and a lot of times they have it very difficult sometimes to get the visa to come back the next year. And I don't know if this is the case with a lot of the agricultural workers, but I would want to make sure that if a worker wants to come back, they should be able to come back without having a huge problem. But this also, now we're talking about more international issues here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that it's beneficial not only to the migrant worker, but also to the farmer if they're able to stay longer, because if that worker is staying on that farm, that's less time and less money that the farmer's going to have to take to spend time training a new workforce as they come in as the others leave.
I mean, you know, and you're talking about training, but in the end, they're people too. And like any good farmer, you know, you're going to show good ethics in bringing in, you know, somebody to work for you. And that's one of the biggest things is I want to see somebody prosper. I want to see somebody learn something. I want somebody to take on as much love for the industry as what I have. And I want them to take pride, like I said, in what they're doing. And that's one of the things by encouraging somebody to stay longer and helping to set roots. You know, how can we develop a policy that allows people to stay, you know, and continue to prosper?
Well, Scott, you know, I'm thinking about this in the long run. My biggest thing is, you know, why if I was a documented worker and you know the government's going to tell you what you have to pay. So most people won't pay more than that number. So the illegal immigrant that comes and the farmer only needs him for a month or two, you know, the illegal immigrant that comes, well, maybe he costs $5 more an hour. But if he's in and out and he doesn't have the paperwork hassle, he's probably going to go with the illegal one sooner than he will with the documented one, because he doesn't have to find work for him for the whole year round.
I agree with you, Tim. I also agree, if you have that type of management, they will always try to find the easiest or cheapest type of labor force. And the only way around that would be enforcement of, as far as from, I'm not sure who would handle that, but the INS or taxes, to make sure that your management is being with all the applicable laws.
So let's figure that we do get a fair and balanced policy. How do we track it? What are some of the ways that we can track and keep some of those employees, so we know exactly where they are, how long they have to be here, because we're going to have to stagger them out if we put them on our upper middle management ones. We'll have to put on a higher scale so we can stagger them out, so that when our managers leave each 5 years, that we have someone trained and ready to go back into that position.
You brought up a good point. Well, our current policy has us that we provide housing, so we already know where they're staying.
Okay.
So if we continue with how it's worded now, we would know where they are. That's one way to track them. And the second idea is, if we continue with that, and we do provide them good housing and transportation like we already do, I don't see why a worker if he's doing a good job and likes his employer, I don't understand why he would not come back and stay with that operation.
I agree with you, Josh. I mean, they get a telephone, they get satellite TV, they get housing, they get pretty much a free ride to the grocery store or any type of social activity, very limited to what they do. But at some point in time, if they have the right type of job, and if you're showing them some ownership, why do they want to leave? And that's one of the big things. But with that 5-year plan, you're going to be, on a little bit of a rotation.
So it sounds like we all agree that we want to keep these workers around longer, or more than the current 11 month and then 1 month leave. And I like the 5-year you brought up the 4-year or 5-year employer that wants to be managers. What I feel like we need to do is, or what channels do we have to do to implement that type of policy?
And, well, as I say, since we're on that and what we need to do to implement the policy, I think we need more than just agriculture's input. Because, really, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, immigrant labor was strictly pretty much to agriculture. Now today, they've moved into many other industry jobs. I mean, they're the guys who are trimming the hedges and mowing the grass, the illegal immigrants. They're the type of guys who are standing outside Lowe's in the morning is going to say, waiting on load trucks, because they can do it cheaper than the regular Lowe's workers will. So, and faster, and they're happy, and that, we need to work with other industries, and maybe the Chamber of Commerce or a Better Business Bureau to work that all of us were on the same page instead of just agriculture trying to change the immigration policy.
I agree with you, and as farmer, I think we can reach out to these other industry organizations that give us a starting point as to go to the right lobbyists to get actual policy done in Congress.
And that's one of the good things about Farm Bureau being a good grassroots organization, that we can go out and we can touch our local legislators and we can express our concern to them and show them and take them back to our family farms or show them what's going on and where we actually need this. And, how we can actually handle it and let it progress through legislative bodies. That's one of the biggest things I think as Farm Bureau needs to do, is take it back to our membership and show them how many $1 million worth of product are out there that need hands-on on each product, I guess.
And go ahead, Steve.
You guys all brought up valid points that it's not just the ag sector. We need to take into consideration all of the other industries that these migrant workers are in, and come up with something that's flexible and reliable, and that accounts for all of these workers in every single industry.
When you bring up flexible, I think you're right, and I think Scott was on the right track too. We need to be fair and balanced, and we are a grassroots group, but I think you were on the right track when you said we need to take it back to our counties, take it through a policy development session, and find out what each and every member of our individual county organizations think of a policy. Draft up a rough policy and see where we go from there. Because if we have 1 or 2 counties that aren't in favor of it, it can rock the whole boat when policy development comes. When you said, Jamie, about when you just said about the other industries, we have to realize that when we look around, the immigrant labor is in just about everything that we do anymore.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, every day we run into somewhere. With, like I said, whether it was the guy trimming the hedges or mowing the grass, you know, the guy milking cows, the guy picking fruit, weeding vegetables. You know, they're not going. The illegal immigrants are not going away. And I think that with this policy, you know, and working together with a larger group, and that's, you know, the Better Business Bureau or the Chamber of Commerce, plus our clout with our federal legislators, we can push for a stronger and better immigration policy.
I think that we came up with a lot of great ideas, and that we need to be flexible. We need to be able to. It's not just, there's not going to be one law or one policy that fits every single one. It's something that we're not just going to come up with a fair and balanced policy in one night. It's something that each industry is going to have to sit down with their organization, their grassroots effort to develop a policy that works for each and every industry. It's not going to be specific.
You talk about different industries, but at the same time, it's, you know, you hate to say it, but it's different regions that are facing different issues at different times of the year. And you know, we almost need to foster something that's more evolving for the whole country.
It's exactly what you're saying, and for the whole country. We need to, you know, each of our policy development groups need to sit down and draft a policy that is pertinent to our area. And, you know, it to me would be an American Farm Bureau policy. You know, that it come before the full American Farm Bureau policy if Pennsylvania could adopt a policy that went in the favor of immigration reform.
I'd like to bring something like this up at a national meeting, National Farm Bureau meeting, just to hear how other states are handling this type of situation. How are they, you know, dealing with migrant workers in their states, or what are their ideas for fostering change?
Scott, you brought up a good point. I agree that I think another thing to include in there would be farmers that use these type of workers. We've heard the side of, we know we need them, we've established that. We agree that they should stay longer or try to reform the policy so that they stay skilled and benefit the farmer that way. But we also need to find out if the farmer currently likes the current legislations that they put on the farmer himself to hire these type of workers. And to try to meet in the middle with both parties.
I know we're trying to talk about policy reform, but there might be some things already enacted that the farmer actually appreciates. And the same way with the worker, that maybe they don't need to be changed, but maybe there's some few things that need to be adjusted to be able to make some of these things work.
I definitely agree with you, Scott. And there may be some things that people are actually happy about, but you know, we all know with change is going to say you're not going to make everybody happy the first time. That's inevitable. And definitely you can worry all you want about it, but we need to start somewhere and start making a policy for each person to have their own say in.
Timekeeper has indicated the end of discussion time. We'll now have 1 minute of quiet time so the contestants may prepare their closing statements. Please put your pens down. We will now hear the closing statements in voluntary order.
We've discussed a lot of great things today here and how we can change immigration reform. I'm glad that each and every one of you had a different idea. Jamie, you had some great ideas on how to keep them here. Scott, you had some great ideas on how to make them take ownership in each and every operation that they're in. we need to keep immigration labor and immigration reform on the front burner, because the reason is food and fiber comes from immigration and all the workers that are out there. If we don't have food and fiber, we're not nationally secure. And if we're not nationally secure, we're the most vulnerable country in the world. And that makes all farmers out there look like they haven't done their job if we don't immigrate or add immigration reform.
I'd like to thank Jamie and Josh and Tim for an excellent discussion. Going back to how Farm Bureau needs to help with the creation of a fair immigration policy. I know one of the biggest things is we need to watch how the immigration policy works with the ag sector. Reform through a grassroots effort like American Farm Bureau could further new ideas so all could benefit on both sides of this equation and coming down to the final product, which is our real consumer. Thank you.
I want to thank the panel for some great topics. I believe that as Farm Bureau, we need to enact a policy and work along with other labor organizations that balance the need to keep these workers and keep them around to benefit the farmer, as well as balance the farmer's need and to have a fair workforce and keep his need and not make his requirements more burden than need to be.
I've really enjoyed our discussion today. We brought up a lot of different points. I think we need to face the hard facts as an ag sector and realize that we need these migrant workers. We need to come up with a policy that's fair and balanced, because without them, we don't have our crops, we don't have our products, we don't have that we're proud for. And I think that we also need to take into consideration that we are not the only sector in the United States that has these migrant workers, and we need to take into consideration others as well. Thank you.
I thank the contestants for their informative discussion. At this time, I will introduce our judges. Our judges for the final round today are Emily Keegan from Nationwide Agribusiness, Melissa Sankey from Penn Ag Industries, John Fry from Center of Dairy Excellence, and Mike Brammer from PA FFA Association. Judges, you are dismissed with our doorkeeper to the tabulation room.
My name is Jamie Finch. I'm from Washington County. I grew up on a small horse farm. I was a 2010 graduate from Penn State University with a degree in ag education, and I'm currently teaching ag at a private Christian school.
My name is Scott Rhodes. I'm from Somerset County. Currently, my father and I farm 1,500 acres of grain and hay, and also run 200 head of beef cattle. I'm a graduate of Penn State with a degree in ag science and leadership.
I'm Tim Lesher. I farm with my father and my wife and my mother. We milk 90 cows and farm about 400 acres. And I have two children as well.
My name is Joshua Benikoff. I'm a fourth generation farmer / musician / everything. I work for Crop Production Services currently, and I'm from Lehigh County.
Speaking for the young farmers and ranchers of Pennsylvania Farm Bureau, I thank the judges for their time and the contestants for the dedication and commitment each of them has shown in being part of this discussion meet.